They say silence is peace, but here, silence is punishment. Welcome to Whispers of Asia, where every story is a shadow wrapped in incense smoke, where temples remember what people forget, and where the quietest places echo with things never meant to be heard. Tonight, we step beyond the threshold of prayer and enter a sanctuary where something sacred was broken, not with a scream, but with a gift. This is a tale of a mountain temple, a forbidden offering, and bells that once sang to the sky, now frozen in eternal stillness. Close your eyes, breathe in the silence, and listen, not for the sound, but for what was taken away. This is the offering that silenced the bells. There was a time when Mount Kurai was known by sound. At dawn, the mountain breathed out fog. At dusk, it breathed it back in. But in the hours between, when rice stalks rustled beneath straw hats, when incense wound its way toward indifferent clouds, the mountain sang. Not with voice, not with flute, but with 12 bronze bells. They hung from the rafters of the temple like solemn guardians, silent through most of the day, sleeping through wind and rain, unmoved even by thunder. Only twice a day did they stir, once at sunrise, once at sunset. And when they did, the chimes did not merely echo through the valley, they washed over it, cleansing it. The villagers would pause in their work. They would close their eyes, bow their heads, and whisper the names of those they had lost. The bells were not rung by hands, but by breath. Monks who inhaled deeply, then exhaled through narrow reeds fitted beneath each bronze dome, coaxing each note from stillness like a prayer from grief. It had always been so, and it was said, though never loudly, that the bells had never missed a chime in over 300 years. Until one morning, they did. It began, as most things do, without warning. The morning mist came, soft as always. Chickens stirred in their coops. A mother hummed as she poured water into a clay kettle. A grandfather leaned on his cane beneath the temple steps, waiting to hear the bells ring. He waited through sunrise. He waited past the first cry of the heron that nested in the reeds near the stream. But the bells did not ring. Not a whisper. Not a sigh. Only the sound of wind moving through bamboo, and even that seemed shy that morning, like it too was waiting. Inside the temple, the monks stood confused, their hands hovering near the reed pipes. The abbot, old Shen, was the first to speak. "Again," he said, "try again." They did. No sound came. The reeds were not blocked. The bronze was not cracked. But the bells, as if wounded by some invisible hand, simply refused to speak. It was only then that the youngest monk, Brother Lian, noticed something that made his skin crawl. The ropes, the sacred cords that suspended each bell from the carved wooden beam, were swaying ever so slightly, as if the bells wanted to ring, but had forgotten how. By mid-morning, the valley was restless. Rumors flew like dust on the wind. "The gods are angry," whispered one woman, clutching a rice doll close to her chest. "Someone's died on the mountain," murmured another. Old Tao, the fisherman who'd lived longer than anyone remembered, spoke only once. "When the bells go silent, the mountain stops listening." By noon, the monks had attempted everything: cleansing rituals, handbell replacements, even striking one of the lesser temple gongs, but it cracked at first touch, its tone flat and mournful, like something buried too long beneath the earth. Still, the bronze bells remained still, silent, watching. waiting. And it was then, just before twilight, that the air changed. It happened so subtly, so intimately, that no one noticed until it was already thick enough to feel. The birds fell silent first, then the dogs, who whined low and refused to approach the temple gates. The incense, which once rose like graceful dancers from bowls of ash, now curled heavy and downward, sinking like breath from dying lips. And as the sun dipped behind the curve of Mount Kurai, the moment of evening chime came. Brother Leon, youngest and most devoted, took his place at the central bell. He had washed his hands 3 times. He had fasted since morning. He had burned sandalwood and whispered every name he had ever learned for the divine. He took a breath and blew. No sound. The reed did not respond. The bell did not move. His breath seemed to vanish the moment it left his lips. He tried again. Nothing. Tears welled in his eyes, not from failure, but from the dread curling in his stomach like a worm in fruit. He turned to Abbot Shen, but the abbot was no longer looking at him. He was looking down the temple steps. A figure was standing at the base of the stairs, wrapped in dark cloak, holding something in red. The monks descended slowly, like the bells had trained them not to run. The figure did not move. His face was veiled by the hood, but his presence was still, not menacing, not welcome, just wrong. He did not speak. He only raised the red-wrapped bundle and held it forward with both hands. Abbot Shen stepped forward. His voice was steadier than it should have been. "Pilgrim," he said, "what do you bring to our gate?" The man said only this, "A gift for the silence." Then he turned, barefoot, and walked back into the mist, leaving behind the bundle, leaving behind a silence so heavy it clung to their robes like damp cloth. Brother Leon stepped forward, heart pounding. The cloth was crimson, vibrant, almost too bright. The knots that tied it were stained a deep rust, as if soaked in old blood and left to dry. He looked up at the abbot. Abbot Shen nodded. "Take it inside." No one saw the reeds beneath the bells tremble ever so slightly as he lifted the bundle. No one heard the faint sound that followed, a single, muffled clink of metal against metal, as if a bell had spoken, but decided it would never speak again. The pilgrim did not return that night, nor the night after, but the bundle he left behind did not rest. It lay upon the temple altar like a wound disguised as devotion, its crimson wrapping catching every flicker of candlelight. The monks gathered around it in cautious reverence, whispering the prayers taught to them as children, prayers meant to name what cannot be seen. The abbot stood closest, his face carved in shadow. His voice, when it came, was low and trembling, as though every word risked breaking something unseen. "Offerings are sacred only when they are known," he said, "and this is not known." The monks said nothing. None dared suggest returning it. None dared suggest refusal. Because in the valley below, word had already spread of a pilgrim who came bearing silence, of a gift that halted the breath of the gods. And in whispered awe, villagers began to bring their own small offerings again. Baskets of rice, folded paper cranes, candles of tallow and wax. They thought the temple had been chosen, that perhaps the bells had gone silent because the divine wished to listen closer. But the abbot knew better. He felt it in the tremor beneath his hands when he reached for the crimson cloth. He felt it in the temperature of the air, the strange coolness that came not from wind, but from absence. Still, he untied the knots. Inside lay something small and pale, a figurine carved crudely from bone and wax, its shape almost human, yet not quite. The limbs were too thin, the face too smooth, the mouth sealed shut by a single thread of black silk. Around its neck hung a circle of bells, tiny, silent, no bigger than fingernails. They did not ring, even when touched, even when shaken. Abbot Shen inhaled sharply. "What is this?" whispered Brother Lian. The abbot did not answer. He only turned the effigy slowly in his hands, his eyes tracing the faint symbols burned into its chest. Letters no one could read, yet all could feel. They were not prayers. They were commands. That night, the monks dreamed of the pilgrim. He walked through the temple corridors, unseen but not unheard. His footsteps made no sound, yet the air seemed to echo in his wake. He carried the same black satchel across his back, and wherever he passed, candles dimmed, not extinguished, but swallowed, their light sinking into invisible hands. The monk awoke gasping, his robe clinging to his skin with sweat. The others stirred too, murmuring of the same vision. "The pilgrim walked in my dream," one said. "In mine he stood beside the bells," said another. "He whispered a name I cannot remember," said a third. Only Abbot Shen remained silent. He had not dreamed. He had not slept. He had spent the entire night seated before the effigy, watching it beneath the faint glow of the shrine lamps. Sometimes he thought he saw the wax glisten like flesh. Once he thought he saw its lips move beneath the thread. But what unsettled him most was not what he saw. It was what he didn't hear, or rather, what he didn't hear. The mountain wind had stopped completely, as if the entire world had paused to listen to something he could not. By morning, the monks gathered again. The abbot ordered that the effigy be locked in the inner sanctum, behind the incense chamber, where only the purest were allowed to walk. Brother Lian protested softly. "Master, if it is unholy, should we not return it to the valley, burn it in salt and smoke?" But the abbot's eyes flicked toward the bell tower, where the 12 bronze mouths still hung unmoving. "Perhaps it came to remind us of something we have forgotten. Perhaps this silence is a lesson." And so the effigy stayed, wrapped again in crimson cloth, placed upon an altar not meant for it. That evening they tried once more to ring the bells. Nothing. Not even the whisper of metal against air. But when Brother Lian walked past the locked inner sanctum, he froze, for he heard, faintly, impossibly, a tiny, trembling tink. Not from the bronze bells above, but from within the cloth-wrapped effigy below. That night the dreams returned. The pilgrim was closer now. His satchel was open. Inside it, Brother Lian could see dozens of small objects, bones, locks of hair, strings of bells, eyes carved from stone. And one by one he took them out and placed them on an unseen altar, each accompanied by a whisper that scraped like rust across the skin of silence. When the monk awoke, his ears were bleeding. In the days that followed, the valley began to change. Livestock refused to approach the river.
Children woke screaming with mouths that moved but made no sound. And at dusk, the shadow of Mount Kurai stretched farther than ever before, long enough to touch the edges of the village, as though the mountain itself was reaching down to listen. The monks performed cleansing rites, burned sage until their lungs stung, recited sutras until their voices cracked. Still, the bells slept. The abbot's health began to falter. His hands shook when he prayed. His eyes dimmed, not from blindness, but from the weight of something unseen pressing against his spirit. And on the 5th night, after the pilgrim's visit, he did something no one in the temple had done for centuries. He prayed not to the gods, but to the silence itself. He whispered into the void, asking it what it wanted. And when he finished, when his words had dissolved into the darkness, he thought he heard a reply. It came not from the altar, not from the wind, but inside his own chest, a low, hollow ringing, like a bell muffled by flesh. The next morning, Brother Leon entered the sanctuary and found the abbot kneeling before the altar. The effigy was gone. Only the crimson cloth remained, damp with something dark and warm. A trail of faint footprints led away from it, barefoot, light, vanishing halfway to the bell tower. He fell to his knees. From above, a slow creak filled the air. One of the 12 bronze bells had begun to sway, not ringing, just moving, gently, as if stirred by breath alone. He whispered through his tears, "Master Shen, what have you done?" The bell stilled. The silence returned. And from deep within the tower, unseen by anyone, something new began to breathe.
The effigy was never found, but its absence made the temple feel more crowded than ever. Every corner seemed to breathe. Every shadow looked shaped like a kneeling man, and every silence, once sacred, began to feel alive. The monks avoided the bell tower now. They moved through the temple like ghosts, their heads bowed, their lips pressed shut even during prayer. Only Brother Leon dared speak aloud anymore, whispering into empty rooms as if to remind himself he still could. But words no longer sounded right here. They carried wrong, echoing too long, as if bouncing off invisible walls. Sometimes his own name returned to him, whispered back in a different voice. One night, he lit a candle in the inner sanctum, the place where the effigy had been locked before it vanished. The air inside was heavy. The scent of salt and old wax clung to the walls. On the altar, the crimson cloth remained folded neatly, though no one had touched it since the abbot's disappearance. Brother Leon approached slowly, his knees trembling beneath his robe. The candle flame flickered, then leaned sharply sideways, not from wind, but from breath. He stopped breathing, and yet the flame bent again. Something unseen was exhaling near him. He whispered into the dark, "Who are you?" And in reply, faint, deliberate, came a sound, not a voice, not words, but tapping. 3 soft taps, like fingernails against stone. A pause, then 2 more. 3, 2. The same pattern used to summon the monks at dawn. He turned toward the wall behind the altar. There, hidden beneath layers of old soot and incense smoke, something glimmered faintly in the candlelight. Carvings, symbols, not written by monks, older, deeper. Circles within circles, lines curved into shapes that resembled faces but weren't quite human. The more he looked, the more it felt like the shapes were not carved into the wall, but looking out from it. And then he saw it. Between the carvings, embedded where the effigy once sat, lay a single small bell. It was blackened, corroded, half swallowed by the stone, yet unmistakably real. He reached out. It was cold. He touched it gently, and for an instant his ears filled with the sound of breathing, not his own, dozens of them, voices buried in metal. He stumbled back, heart pounding, but the candlelight dimmed before he could flee. The air thickened, not into darkness, but into silence so absolute that it felt like a physical thing pressing against his skin. And through that silence came a single thought, not heard, but known. You cannot unring what was offered. The next morning, the other monks found Brother Leon in the sanctuary, kneeling motionless before the wall. His candle had burned down to a pool of wax that had run cold. His lips moved faintly as though still whispering, but no sound came out. They carried him to his chamber. He did not wake for 3 days. When he finally did, his first words were not his own. "The offering spoke," he whispered, "not with sound, not with tongue. It spoke through what was missing." "What was missing?" another monk asked. He turned to them, eyes wide and hollow. "Sound," he said. "It used sound as its absence." That evening, when the monks gathered for meditation, they noticed something strange. The great bronze bells, once still as tombstones, now trembled faintly, though no one had touched them. The movement was so delicate that it could have been wind, but there was no wind. Even the incense smoke rose perfectly straight, unmoved. The monks exchanged nervous glances. Brother Leon stayed silent. He could feel the vibration through the floor, faint but deliberate, like a pulse. And then he realized something worse. Each vibration came a few seconds after someone spoke. Every time a voice rose in the hall, even a whisper, the bells answered, not with chime, but with movement. They were not ringing anymore. They were listening. That night, Brother Leon dreamed again. He stood in the bell tower, surrounded by the 12 bronze mouths, but they no longer hung above him. They stood around him, level to his eyes, forming a circle. Inside each one sat a face, not carved, alive. The faces were the monks. Their lips were sewn with black silk, their eyes open wide, and their heads tilted forward as if waiting for confession. He screamed, or tried to, but no sound escaped. His throat burned, his ears rang with the memory of 1,000 tiny bells shaking just out of reach. When he turned toward the temple courtyard, he saw candlelight moving through the corridors. A figure, the abbot, alive. But his robes were wrong, stained dark, dragging like wet cloth. His head bowed, his hands clasped around something wrapped in crimson. The effigy. He followed him, barefoot, silent. The abbot walked to the base of the bell tower and placed the effigy on the ground. He began to chant, not in prayer, but in rhythm. Each syllable struck the air like a hammer against skin. The bells trembled. Then, for the first time since the silence began, one of them rang.
Not bright, not holy. A low, cracked moan that seemed to come from beneath the earth. The abbot stopped chanting. He turned slowly toward Brother Leon. His mouth opened, but where his tongue should have been, there was only wax. By dawn, the abbot was gone again. Only a smear of red wax remained at the base of the tower. And the effigy, once pale and still, now stood upright against the wall, its head tilted slightly toward the largest bell, as if listening. The monks did not touch it. They simply knelt and prayed. But Brother Leon knew prayer no longer mattered, because when he closed his eyes, he could hear the bells breathing back. And when he listened closely enough, he realized each breath carried a different rhythm, each one matching the heartbeat of a man in the room. One by one, the monks stopped breathing. One by one, the bells stilled again, until all that remained was the effigy, smiling faintly, its sealed mouth stretching the silk into a perfect, silent curve.
There was once wisdom in the silence, but now there was only a void. A heavy pause that devoured even memory. The monks moved through the temple as if wading through water. Nothing echoed anymore, not their footsteps, not the wind through the lanterns, not the turning of prayer wheels whose soft clicking had always been a comfort. Even sound had begun to fear this place. But within that silence, something had awakened. And it had begun with him, the abbot. No one saw when Abbot Shen returned. He was simply there one morning, sitting beneath the great bodhi tree in the courtyard, head bowed, hands pressed together as if in endless supplication. His robes were darker now, stiff with something dried. And though his lips moved in prayer, no sound escaped. When the monks gathered, unsure, he lifted a hand in quiet command, and with that single gesture, the temple began to obey again. Not out of reverence, out of fear. For something in his eyes was no longer human. Abbot Shen returned to his chambers, where he remained for 3 days and nights. During that time, strange things began to happen. The incense stopped burning properly. It would spark, hiss, and curl downward into the bowls. Offerings left at the base of the bells would vanish by morning. And once, a novice monk swore he saw one of the bells weeping, a slow, clear drop of fluid sliding down its bronze curve like a tear. They dared not ask the abbot. He did not speak unless summoned, and when he did, his voice seemed deeper, distant, like it traveled from far away, as if echoing up through a well in the earth. But Brother Leon watched him. He had not forgotten the vision, the wax where the abbot's tongue had been, the satchel, the chanting, and though no one else would speak it aloud, he knew this man, this shadow of the abbot, had brought something back with him, or perhaps had never fully returned at all. So one night, Leon followed him. He waited until the bells had finished their nightly trembling, until the wind had stilled, and even the moonlight dared not touch the stone steps. Then he crept to the abbot's chamber. The door was open. Inside, the air was thick, not with smoke, but with salt, with rot. And there, kneeling in the center of a circle drawn in black ash, was Abbot Shen. Before him stood the effigy, once again wrapped in crimson cloth, but now pulsing faintly as though something inside it was breathing. The abbot's hands hovered above it, trembling. His voice, no longer silent, was chanting something low, rhythmic, guttural. The words were not from any sutra. They were older, not prayers, but
but bargains. Leon froze. The abbot lifted the cloth. Beneath it, the effigy had changed. No longer bone and wax, it now bore a face. Human, feminine, eyes closed, lips slightly parted, though the black thread still held them shut. It looked as if it were about to speak. But when Leon stepped backward in horror, he kicked a bowl. It shattered. The abbot turned. His eyes were bleeding, not from injury, but from something inside him pushing outward. He rose slowly, lifting the effigy in both hands. "She's listening," he said, voice hoarse, cracked, but unmistakably joyous. "She hears through the silence, every breath we bury, every sound we swallow, it feeds her." Brother Leon whispered, "What have you brought into this place?" The abbot stepped forward. "The bells were made to praise," he said. "But praise grows stale. She wants sacrifice now. Silence is not punishment. It is proof." "Proof of what?" Leon asked. The abbot smiled. "We obey." The next day, the abbot gathered the monks beneath the bell tower. He did not preach. He only gave a command. "No one will speak until the bells ring again." And then he disappeared behind the sanctum doors, locking them from within. 3 days passed, then 7. The silence deepened, not just in the temple, but in the village below. People came with offerings, with prayers for healing, with rice and candles and coins. They waited for the chimes at dusk. None came, and still the abbot did not emerge. But sometimes, when the mist hung heavy over the mountaintop, Brother Leon swore he could see a figure behind the temple window, rocking gently, cradling something in his arms. And sometimes he heard a lullaby, not sung, not hummed, but echoed from the bells. Not all of them, just one, a single low toll, drawn out, aching, hollow, as if morning itself had been forged in bronze. It happened on the 14th night. The bells rang, all of them, together, at once, but not in harmony, not in rhythm. They screamed. A sound not of music, but of pain, deep, bone-thick pain that seemed to rip through the air itself. The monks fell to their knees, clutching their ears. Brother Leon ran toward the bell tower, stumbling over loose stones and offerings left in panic. Inside, the air shimmered. Heat or something older. At the base of the tower, the ground was scorched black, the stone cracked, and in the center of the circle, where offerings were never meant to be placed, stood the abbot. Barefoot, robes gone, holding the effigy above his head. It was no longer still. Its eyes were open, mouth wide, the thread torn away, and from within it came a sound not like any other. Not scream, not chant, but a deep, hollow toll. A bell inside a body. A curse made into sound. And with that final toll, the 12 bronze bells above him shattered. Each one exploded in silence. No sound, no echo, no debris. They were simply gone. The monks never found the abbot again. Only the scorch mark remained, and the effigy, now perfectly still, mouth closed once more, wrapped in its crimson cloth, returned to the altar, as if it had never left, as if it had always belonged. The bells had shattered, but there had been no sound, no thunder of breaking bronze, no crash upon the stone. Just absence, clean,
cold, complete. And from that moment, silence was no longer a condition, it was a presence. It moved. Down the slope of Mount Kurai it came, rolling gently like fog at twilight, spilling into the valley where villagers stirred in their sleep, then paused, then sat upright in the dark, with no idea why their hearts had begun to pound. At first, they noticed little. Birdsong faded earlier, dogs stopped barking, children hesitated before speaking, as if tasting their own breath for fear it might disappear. But then came the wells. The water stopped echoing. When the buckets dropped, no splash. When the ropes creaked, no sound. Only the feel of weight being lifted. Only silence looking back. In the rice paddies, farmers called to one another, but their voices did not carry. They fell flat, like stones thrown into an empty field. A woman clapped her hands to chase off the sparrows, but even the birds did not stir. It was not quiet. It was a smothering, like wool stuffed into the ears of the land itself. Even the wind bent differently, curling through reeds as though reluctant to disturb the hush. Then the child disappeared. Her name was Mayu, 7 years old, known for her laughter, sharp as the river's edge. She'd been playing near the boundary path, where temple stones marked the edge of sacred ground. When she didn't return by dusk, her mother climbed the hill with a lantern and a voice hoarse from calling. Neither returned. The next morning, the villagers found the lantern beside the shrine gate, still lit, its flame unmoving. Beside it, a doll made of wax and thread. No face, but braided hair and 2 red threads for feet, snipped short, like something had taken her step by step. Fear began to rot the village from within. Offerings increased. The shrine steps became cluttered with folded cranes, dried flowers, and salt bowls. But no monk came to accept them. The temple had closed its gates. No chimes, no chants, no incense, just stillness. Brother Lian remained behind the high walls. He watched from above, helpless, as the villagers waited at the base of the stairs like orphans before a home that had forgotten it once opened its doors. He longed to shout, to warn them, to tell them of the effigy, of the bells that had screamed themselves into nothingness. But something held his tongue. Not fear, not obedience. It was as though every word he might have spoken had already been taken, borrowed by something that had no voice of its own. Then came the crows. Hundreds of them, silent. They gathered on rooftops, trees, fences. They did not caw, they did not flap, just stood, watching, their heads tilted toward the temple. One old man, half blind and once a monk himself, stood in the center of the village square and cried out, "They've come for the sound, they know where it went." No one answered him, because suddenly no one could. The voices were gone. It happened like fog, thick and unnoticed until it was too late. One by one, voices vanished, not with pain, not with blood, just silence. It began with those closest to the mountain, then it spread to those who lingered at the shrine too long. At first, people believed they had caught an illness, something with no fever, no cough,
just the theft of voice. But soon they realized something more terrifying. They could speak. They felt their throats work, felt their mouths move, but the air no longer carried them. Their words were eaten before they ever left the lips, swallowed by something unseen. And all the while, the wax doll on the shrine step remained, unmoving, watching. Its thread feet stained a deeper red with each passing night. Some believed it was Mayu. Some believed it was listening. In desperation, a group of villagers climbed the mountain, knocking on the temple gates with bare fists and wet eyes. Brother Lian heard them. He stood behind the wooden doors, his hand pressed flat against the grain, as if he might absorb their sorrow through the wood. But he did not open. He could not. Behind him, the effigy had been placed atop the altar again, this time not by human hands. Its mouth was open, thread torn, and when the villagers wept below, he could hear a soft breathing emerge from that small carved mouth, synchronizing with their sobs, matching their grief, feeding on it. That night, the wax doll disappeared from the shrine steps. In its place, 12 pebbles, arranged in a perfect circle, each one bearing a faint symbol, a line, a curve, a spiral. He knew the pattern. He had seen it carved in the inner sanctum, behind the blackened bell. He began to write. Not in ink, in ash. Lines on the floor, circles around the altar. He did not know what he was doing, only that his hands moved with certainty, as if guided. And when he slept, if one could call it sleep, he dreamed again. This time he was beneath the valley, not buried, but deep, as though walking the root system of the mountain itself. And far above, muffled and slow, he heard the world. Laughter, prayer, bells ringing. Until a whisper like a blade. They gave what was not theirs to offer. Then silence, so vast, so endless. It rang louder than sound. It was the bell, and it wanted more. He awoke to find the village below veiled in a fog that would not rise. A mother screamed, soundless, as she ran through the streets carrying a child who would not wake. Her mouth moved like a hymn, but the air gave her nothing. The child was not dead, but only the faintest tremor, like the pause before a breath. And then, a tiny sound. Not from the child, not from the mother, from above, from the mountain, from a bell that no longer existed.
The silence had spread so wide, it had started to feel like memory itself was fading. Even those who still could speak found no reason to, for words were useless things now. They reached no ears, touched no hearts, and returned to no one. The village below was dying quietly, but the temple above had not yet finished listening. Brother Lin no longer dreamed of bells, he dreamed of names, dozens of them, whispered through invisible lips. Some he knew, brothers, elders, pilgrims. Some were ancient, syllables that felt like dust falling through water. And each time he woke, those names lingered on his tongue, tasting of salt and ash. He began to write them down, at first on paper, then, when ink ran dry, on the floor. Then, when space ran out, on his own skin. The names burned as he wrote them, and he began to understand that perhaps they were not meant to be written at all. But one night, while his trembling hand still moved in the dark, his brush snapped, and from the hollow beneath the broken shaft, a single rolled parchment fell free. Old, crumpled, wrapped with a string of faded red. A scroll, hidden in the spine of his brush. He stared at it for a long time, unsure if his mind had conjured it from fatigue or if it had always been there, waiting. Then he opened it. Inside was a list, names upon names, each one written in black ink that shimmered faintly as though the words had been written in something alive. At the top, a single line, "For those who broke the silence." He turned the parchment, reading downward. The first name he recognized immediately, Shen Hualin, the abbot. The second, Mayu, the child from the valley. The third, Brother Lin. His breath caught. He blinked, and more names began to appear, not inked, emerging, like wetness bleeding through paper. The names of the monks, the villagers, one by one, in the order they had vanished or lost their voices, and beside each name a mark, a small circle drawn in black, 12 in total. He realized what they were. Bells. He dropped the scroll, heart pounding. The parchment rolled across the floor and stopped against the wall, right beneath the spot where the effigy had once stood. From behind the wall, something moved, a low scratching sound, as if something was being written back. He pressed his ear against the cold stone. At first, there was only that scratching, steady, patient, precise. Then a voice, soft, measured, familiar. Abbot Sen. "Names hold weight, Lin," it said. "Names are offerings too. Each one spoken, each one remembered, is a thread that binds the living to the listening." Lin trembled. He whispered into the stone, "What have you done?" The voice sighed, and with that sigh, dust fell from the ceiling like faint gray snow. What was asked, it said, what was promised. The wall pulsed faintly beneath his hand, like breath behind bone. And then the voice turned tender, almost fatherly. "You must add the rest." Lin staggered backward. His pulse roared in his ears, the only sound left to him that still belonged to himself. He grabbed the scroll again, but the parchment was blank. Only one name remained visible, his own, and beside it a small black circle drawn half in ink, half in blood. That night, he found an old monk named Suto still alive in the outer chamber, blind and frail, clutching a rosary of cracked beads. When Lin showed him the scroll, Suto's face turned pale. He whispered, "That is the record of the broken." "The what?" Lin asked. The temple was not built for prayer. It was built to hold, to contain. He pointed a trembling finger toward the bell tower. The 12 bells were not made to call the divine. They were made to drown out the names that called it. Lin's hands shook. "You mean, the abbot woke something that once slept beneath us, a thing bound by sound itself. It cannot live in silence, but it can feed on those who do. Every time we speak its name, we give it form again." Lin felt his throat tighten. He whispered into the stone, "What name?" The old monk opened his mouth to answer.
but no sound came. His eyes widened. He clawed at his throat. Then, without breath, he collapsed, and the rosary beads rolled across the floor, each one striking the stone with a perfect measured rhythm, like tiny bells. Brother Lin backed away in horror, clutching the scroll. The temple felt smaller now, as if walls had crept closer in the dark. He stumbled into the courtyard. The moon was hidden behind thick fog, and in the distance the valley lights had gone out. Every single home below, dark, every voice, gone. Only one light remained, a faint glow from the bell tower above him. He turned toward it and saw her, standing in the archway, crimson cloth wrapped around her shoulders, eyes half closed like a sleepwalker. The effigy, no longer wax, no longer still. She walked slowly toward him, bare feet leaving no sound, her mouth sealed again with black thread, and in her hands she held the same scroll, unrolled, fluttering in an invisible wind. As she passed him, the parchment brushed against his arm, and where it touched him, new writing appeared, his name again, and beside it a small black circle, drawn complete. The 13th bell. He fell to his knees, shaking. Tears filled his eyes as he tried to scream, but the sound died before it reached the air. He understood now there was one name left to add, only one. The silence demanded 12, but silence itself would be the 13th, and the final bell would toll not in bronze, but in flesh. At dawn, the villagers woke to find strange marks carved into the temple gate, symbols they did not recognize, spirals and circles intertwined. No monks remained, no voices lingered, only the wind, heavy with the echo of things that should never have been remembered. And at the base of the stairs, the scroll lay open, its ink still wet. The last line read, "The bells have names, and now so do the mouths that fed them."
No one remembered when the bell began to bleed. It wasn't sudden. There was no crack, no cry of metal. Just a slow, seeping line, dark and thick, trailing down from the rim of the largest bronze mouth, as though the bell had grown weary of silence and chosen to grieve instead. At first, Brother Leon thought it was rust, but rust didn't glisten like that, didn't smell like salt and copper, didn't thicken in the cold night air. He reached out to touch it, and the moment his finger made contact, the bell groaned, not with sound, with weight. The iron beneath his feet seemed to shift, and for a second it felt like he was standing not in a tower, but inside a mouth, and the mouth was breathing. He fell back, gasping. The trail of blood curved beneath the bell and followed the grain of the wooden beam like a script he couldn't read. It moved slowly, crawling across the surface in patterns that coiled and branched like roots of an ancient tree. The silence around it pulsed, and as he watched, the line of blood divided, spreading to the other bells, one by one. Within minutes, each bronze shape had a single wound, a red line, perfectly centered, like an eye opened sideways, like a memory that refused to heal. He ran back to the sanctuary, clutching a half-burned prayer slip in one hand, its ink smeared by sweat. The scroll of forbidden names was gone. In its place stood the effigy again, now seated, legs crossed, as if it had chosen its place among the sacred. Its mouth was still sealed, but its eyes were open, not painted, not carved, open, wet, blinking. They followed Leon as he moved. He collapsed at the altar. His mind was unraveling thread by thread, but something deeper, older, kept him tethered. The teachings, the rituals, the old truths passed down from monk to monk like embers in the dark. So he lit a candle, just one, and beneath that fragile light he began to write again. Not names, not prayers, questions. What was the first bell made for? Why did we learn to silence more than to speak? What God were we not praying to? The answers didn't come as words. They came as tremors, small ones, from beneath the floor. The temple was shifting, not collapsing, rearranging, as if the foundation was being pulled into a new shape, one that matched the pattern drawn in blood across the bells. That night he heard crying, not human, not child. It came from above, from the highest bell. He climbed the tower alone, lantern swaying in one hand, fear braided tightly into his breath. He reached the top just before midnight. The wind had died again. The mist pressed close, making the tower feel like a throat inside a sleeping beast. And at the center, beneath the largest bell, he found a figure. Not the abbot, not a monk, but something shaped like them, draped in tattered robes, head bowed low, and from where its face should be, a stream of blood fell in rhythm, drop by drop. It pooled at the base of the bell, the same bell that had wept first. Leon stepped closer, and the figure looked up. There was no face, only the shape of one, pressed outward from inside the skin, as if a soul had tried to leave the wrong way. No eyes, no mouth, only pressure. And yet it spoke, not aloud, but into his bones. The silence is the vessel, the blood is the vow, the bell is the mouth through which the vow returns. He dropped the lantern. It shattered. Fire spilled, but the flame did not catch the robes. It hissed and vanished, as if even fire obeyed the silence now. He fled, down the steps, past the sanctuary, into the archives where the old texts slept. He began tearing them open, scriptures, maps, ritual guides. And at the very back, behind a loose brick, he found a sealed jar. Inside, parchments bound with black twine. No prayers, only diagrams of bells, of mouths, of temples shaped like skulls. And at the center of each, a red figure seated in silence, thread across its mouth, hands on its knees. The effigy. She had been here long before them, long before the village, long before monks gave her a name. The temple was not her prison. It was her throne. He returned to the tower at dawn. The figure was gone, but in its place a single bowl of salt, filled with blood. The bell above it was cracked, split perfectly down the middle. He touched the rim, and for the first time in weeks, a bell rang. But the sound wasn't his. It wasn't from outside. It was inside him. A deep, echoing clang that rippled through his ribs, through his spine, through his teeth. He dropped to his knees and heard the whisper again. The bell that bleeds remembers every name it has devoured. He screamed, but only silence came out. Down in the valley, a child stirred in sleep. She had not spoken in days. Her mother wept beside her bed, her sobs swallowed by the curse that dulled every sound. But then, a noise, a faint toll, soft, from somewhere high above the fog.
The child blinked and whispered, "It's still hungry."
There was once wind on Mount Kurai. It whispered through the reeds, bent the prayer flags, carried the scent of jasmine in wood smoke across the hills. But now, the wind moved differently. It still came, at dusk, at dawn, but it no longer sang. It brushed across your skin without stirring your robes. It turned pages that had not been opened. It creaked doors that had already been closed. And though it passed through branches and ropes and chimes, not a single note followed in its path. The wind had learned silence, and it had begun to teach it. Brother Lion stood beneath the temple's gate at sunrise. He felt the breeze press against his face, cool, soft, weightless. But no sound came with it, not even the rustle of leaves. He turned toward the woods that bordered the shrine steps. The trees were still, but he saw them breathing. Leaves trembled, trunks leaned, roots curled inward like fists clenched in prayer, not because of the wind, because of what it carried. Not a song, not a voice, but a memory too heavy to hold in the air. In the village below, the silence had taken on new shape. Where once it was absence, now it was pattern. A man lit a fire. The flames rose, but the crackle was missing. A pot boiled, but no bubbles rose to the surface. And when a widow hummed a lullaby to a child who could not sleep, the child looked up and asked, "Why are you just mouthing it?" The woman touched her throat. She hadn't noticed. Her voice had left her, but her lips still moved, out of habit, out of hope, out of the foolish belief that air still listened. The wind swept down the mountain, but it did not bring cold. It brought remembrance. It passed over the fields where the rice had grown thin. It entered homes where windows were sealed shut, and every place it touched, people began to feel their breath thicken. Not vanish, just resist, as if the air itself no longer wished to be drawn in, as if the lungs were no longer welcome. Back at the temple, Brother Lion watched the flags that once danced from the bell tower. They hung limp now, even as the wind curled around them. The silence wasn't just inside the bells anymore. It was alive in the air. He tried once again to ring the smallest bell, the one unbroken, hidden beneath the altar. He blew through the reed, steady and slow, the way the elders had taught him. But the wind caught his breath before it reached the bronze. It snatched it, held it, and buried it. Not in the tower, in the trees. That night, he followed the wind. Barefoot, wrapped in only a shawl, he left the temple and walked into the forest. The path wound between gnarled roots and shrines lost to time. But the wind moved ahead of him, a guide, a warning, a whisper. And the farther he went, the colder it became. Not the cold of winter, the cold of emptiness. The absence of song, of prayer, of warmth, of presence. Even the stars dimmed. Even the moon dared not peer too deeply between the branches. In the heart of the forest he found it, a stone circle, 12 pillars worn with age, their tops broken, moss-covered, each marked with a bell, each cracked. And in the center, a well, dry, shallow, filled with feathers, black feathers, hundreds.
As he stepped into the circle, the wind stopped completely. No rustle, no breath, just stillness. Then a single feather rose. It floated in the air, twisting, dancing without motion until it landed in Lion's palm. And then he heard it. Not through ears, not through mind, but through skin. A whisper burned across his flesh from wrist to shoulder. We were the wind once. We were the voice between the branches. You sealed us with sound. Now you've offered your silence, and we return to breathe through it. The trees bent inward. A soundless gust swept through the stones, lifting the feathers into a slow spiral. And he saw them, figures made of wind and ash, invisible but outlined by the way the feathers moved. They stepped between the stones, each bearing a small bell around their necks. None of them rang, but the pressure of their presence was louder than thunder. He knelt, not from reverence, but because his legs no longer obeyed him. The wind coiled around him, lifting his shawl, pulling at his breath, and then it entered his mouth. Not violently, gently, as if returning what had been borrowed. But it did not give back sound. It gave back memory. He remembered now, centuries ago, before monks, before the temple, before the first bell ever rang, there were voices, too many, too loud. They threatened the balance. And so the bells were forged not to call heaven, but to seal something away. And with each generation, the bells were praised, not knowing they were prison guards, until someone made an offering, one they should not have. Lion gasped as the wind left him. The clearing emptied, the feathers fell, and the silence shifted. It was no longer still. It waited. He turned back toward the temple. He had to warn the others, but there were no others. Only the effigy, only the scroll, only the bells that no longer bled. And above it all, the wind, carrying nothing, no scent, no voice, no sound, just a hunger that had learned to ride the breeze. In the valley that night, every door slammed shut at once, but no one heard it.
In a temple gone mute, where bells had shattered and prayers were swallowed whole, one monk began to hear again. But what he heard was never meant for human ears. Brother Leon first noticed it in sleep, a faint hum, low, continuous, like breath exhaled beneath stone. It came from the floor beneath his mat, not every night, only when he dreamt of names. He would wake suddenly, gasping, heart pounding, with the sound still ringing in his bones. Not in his ears, not around him, inside him. It pulsed in the cavities between his ribs, coiled around the drumbeat of his heart, and settled behind his eyes. The sound was alive, and it was getting closer. He tried to ignore it. He cleaned the altars, lit incense with shaking hands, recited verses that fell apart as they left his lips. But each time he paused, it returned. A hum, then a whisper, then a rhythm. 3 beats, 2 breaths, 1 name. He didn't recognize the name, but the syllables struck something ancient in him, a memory not his own. He began writing again, not on scrolls, but on the walls, on his arms,
on the floor beneath the broken bells. Symbols he didn't understand, but his hand moved as if guided. The other monks avoided him. They had begun to lose more than their voices. Some no longer blinked. Others sat in corners, unmoving, listening to the soundless air like men awaiting judgment. They feared him, the monk who still moved, who still breathed, who now twitched at every gust of wind as if it carried words sharpened into blades. And they were right to fear him, because Leon had begun to hear things the bells had buried. One morning, he followed the sound to a hidden door beneath the bell tower, a door no one remembered, but the stones remembered. It opened on its own. Dust thick as ash greeted him. The staircase beneath had not known light for centuries. He descended alone, the hum now loud enough to shape the air. Each step echoed not with noise, but with pressure, as if the temple itself pushed back against his weight. At the bottom, he found it, a chamber, circular, stone walls etched with patterns of coiled breath and silenced mouths, and at the center, a pit, shallow, dry, carved into the shape of an open bell, and inside the pit, a second effigy, larger, its limbs twisted in ritual position, its head tilted toward the ceiling, and its mouth wide open, but not with wax or thread, with sound. A deep, resonant hum arose from its throat, the very hum that had been haunting him. Leon fell to his knees, not out of reverence, but because his knees no longer remembered how to stand. The hum grew louder, and then, within the sound, voices, 1,000 of them, layered, twisting, crying, praying, names, dates, final breaths. "We are the echoes of those who dared speak too long," they whispered, "and you have heard what was buried for a reason." He clutched his head, blood dripped from his ears, the chamber spun. He saw visions, a young monk sealing the first bell with his own tongue, villagers casting a child into the woods, her name never spoken again, a ritual forbidden where silence was not punishment but protection. When he awoke, he lay at the altar once more. He did not know how he had returned, but the effigy sat beside him, its head resting gently against the broken bell. Its eyes were open, and they wept wax. The sound did not stop, even in waking, even in daylight. The bells, though shattered, began to hum through the stone that once held them, and the monks, those who still breathed, now turned their heads as Leon passed, as if they could hear the hum through him. Because the silence no longer lived in the temple, it lived in him. He tried to speak, but when he opened his mouth, only one thing came out: the name. The one he had heard in the pit, the one etched now into every wall, into every broken bell. He didn't understand it, but his voice obeyed it. His blood responded to it, and when he said it aloud, the air in the sanctuary shivered. Candles went out, monks fell to the ground, and the wax effigy turned its head, slowly, toward the sound. She had been waiting for her name to be returned. Now she had it. That night, Leon dreamed again, but not alone. He stood in the courtyard, moonlight painting the stone in pale silver, and before him the bells hung once more, recast, remade, whole. And around him stood monks, hundreds, faces veiled in cloth, mouths sewn shut, and in the center, the effigy walked between them, her mouth still closed, but her voice filling the air through Leon's throat. He was now the 13th bell, and he was ringing. He awoke screaming, but no sound came. Only blood, only trembling, only silence. And from far below the mountain, in the center of the valley, a farmer dropped his hoe and looked to the hills. He did not hear anything, but his bones shook, and his heart whispered, "Someone has heard too much, and now the silence wants to be heard again."
There had not been a feast at the temple in years, not since the bells last rang, not since the air forgot how to carry joy. But on the first night of the full moon, after the blood traced the bells, Brother Leon found a scroll placed beneath his door. It bore no signature, only one line of calligraphy inked in flawless red. "Let us offer what remains. Let the silence eat." The next day, the preparations began. Monks swept the steps, dusted the altars, and unsealed storerooms untouched for decades. They moved as if commanded, hands folding cloth, grinding incense, preparing bowls of rice and dried lotus petals. No one spoke. They no longer had to. They understood. This was not a celebration. This was a surrender. And the silence was hungry. Brother Leon watched them from the tower. His hearing had changed. He no longer heard sounds, he heard intention. A footstep became a thought. A clink of porcelain carried fear. Even the sway of a robe whispered what the mouth would never say. And beneath it all, he heard a name, the name the silence had given itself. It pulsed in every motion, beat behind every bowed head, a name too vast for syllables, a name that folded air around it like prayer around fire. At twilight, the feast was laid in the outer courtyard. Dozens of bowls, fruits ripened without sunlight, fish that had never touched water, rice blackened from age, yet steaming in untouched pots. And at the head of the table, a seat carved from stone, too small for a man, too large for a child. It had always been there, but now it had purpose. Draped across it a crimson cloth, upon it a single bell, whole and polished, resting like an eye waiting to blink. As the moon rose, the monks gathered in silence. They wore their finest robes, white stitched with thread the color of dusk. Their faces were painted in ash, mouths sealed with soft gauze soaked in honey. They did not speak. They did not need to. The offering had begun. Leon took his place among them, his body trembling with knowledge. He was no longer merely brother. He was vessel. He was bell. And tonight, he would ring in silence. The ceremony unfolded like breath, slow, sacred, and unseen. A monk stepped forward, poured water into an empty bowl. The water vanished before it settled. Another offered fruit, laid it before the crimson seat. The skin split open, no seeds inside. A third cut his palm with a blade of incense ash. His blood spilled, but made no sound as it struck the stone. Each offering, one by one, disappeared into stillness, taken, accepted, consumed. And then the air changed. It thickened,
sinking like oil poured over fire. The moon dimmed, the flames of the lanterns leaned inward, and from the shadows beyond the gate, a shape emerged, not walking, not gliding, just appearing, as if it had always been waiting just outside the world. It wore the robes of a monk, but its limbs were wrong, too long, too slow, as though memory itself had tried to sculpt a body and failed. It had no face, only the suggestion of one, folded inward, like silence wearing a mask, and around its neck a chain of tiny bells. None of them moved, none of them needed to, because now every monk in the courtyard was trembling in harmony, as if they were the bells. The figure moved toward the stone seat. It did not sit, it hovered, a breath above the stone, and where it hovered, the air fractured, like glass beginning to crack. Then the bell rang, not loud, not sudden, but deep, so deep it seemed to rise from beneath the earth itself, a single tone, and when it faded, every monk fell forward at once, their foreheads striking stone in perfect silence, not from pain, not from reverence, from release. Something had been taken, and they were lighter. Brother Leon remained standing. The bell still hummed within him, a resonance, a curse, a memory made physical. He stepped forward. The figure turned to him, its mouthless face bent slightly, as if acknowledging what he had become. Not priest, not monk, but host. Leon opened his hand. Inside it, the 13th bell, small, black, warm. It pulsed against his skin. He knelt before the figure and offered it. The silence leaned down, and for a moment everything listened. Then the bell disappeared, vanished between breaths, and with it the figure, the crimson cloth, the stone seat. Gone. The courtyard was empty again. No feast, no food, no monks. Only Leon remained, alone. The last bell. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking, not from fear, but because his fingers still heard the name, and now they wanted to write. Far below the mountain, the valley awoke to a strange scent. Food, roasted, sweet, a feast in the wind. But when they opened their windows, there was nothing, only the quiet, only a whisper rising from the trees. It has eaten, and it will ask again. The bells were gone, but they had left behind their weight. Not metal, not sound, but a heaviness that sank into the stone, into the floor, into the bones of the mountain itself. And now, the earth beneath the tower had begun to change. Brother Leon noticed it first. He had been kneeling in the courtyard, listening to the soil. That's what he did now. He listened, because the air no longer spoke, but the ground did. Softly, slowly, as though everything buried had begun to turn. At first it was a hum, low and rhythmic, like the breath of something sleeping under the rock. But then it became more, a pulse, a vibration that passed through the soles of his feet, up through his spine, until his teeth ached. The earth was moving, not quaking, breathing. That night, the tower cracked. It was not violent. There was no collapse, no storm, only a slow splitting sound as the base stones of the bell tower shifted apart by less than the width of a finger. But the crack ran deep, not upward, but down. And from within it, a breath escaped. Cold, wet, ancient. Leon lit a lantern and entered the tower alone. The others would not follow. They had grown too quiet, too still. Many no longer moved from their rooms at all. Their eyes were wide, their mouths sealed with more than silence, and their shadows stretched too far for men who no longer walked. The crack at the tower's base widened as Leon approached. It pulsed faintly, like a wound that hadn't begun to bleed. He knelt before it. The stones beneath his knees were warm. He reached out and touched the edge. At once a vision struck him, not of light, but of tunnels, endless, spiraling, carved with hands that had no fingers, etched with symbols that had no language. And at the center, not a shrine, not a grave, but a mirror. Not glass, soil polished by centuries of prayer. And what stared back from it wasn't him. He jerked his hand back. The earth moaned, a real sound, the first in days. But it wasn't relief. It was a warning. What was sealed is remembering itself. Leon returned the next day with tools, not to dig, but to uncover. This was not a collapse. This was discovery. He pulled away stone, layer by layer. Each revealed surface bore more carvings, spirals, mouths, 12 in a circle, and in the center, a 13th, a hole. He reached in and found something waiting. It was soft, waxy, warm. He pulled it free. A face, small, childlike, carved from the same wax as the effigy. But this one had no mouth at all, just smooth skin where a voice had never been allowed to live. He placed it on the altar. The silence deepened, and from beneath the tower, the breathing grew louder. It was not alone. There were others, dozens, hundreds, breathless mouths beneath the earth, waiting. That night, Leon lay awake. The temple floor creaked, not with footsteps, but with weight, as if something beneath the floorboards was beginning to stir, not digging, rising. And in his ears the hum returned, but this time it was speaking words. You gave us the bell, you gave us the name, but now give us the root. In the archives, he found old scrolls sealed with wax so brittle it turned to powder. They told of a time before temples, before chimes, before monks, when the mountain had a different name, a name spoken only once, then buried beneath 12 bronze mouths for fear it might speak itself back into the world. A name not of worship, of warning. The bells were not for prayer. They were for containment. Each bell held a piece of the silence, not to invite it, to trap it. But when the offering was made, the seals were unmade. And now, the silence was looking for its last bell. He returned to the tower, alone, always alone. The crack had grown wider. The earth glistened, and down inside the wound he saw not soil, but a tunnel, carved into the shape of a throat. He climbed in, not with fear, but with knowing. This was always where it ended, beneath the bells, beneath the breath, beneath the name. At the bottom he found them, the mouths, dozens of them, carved into the walls. Some were real, some were stone, some were wax. All were open. None made sound. And in the center, a shrine, shaped like the bell tower above, upside down. Within it, the final effigy, larger than any before, its face featureless, its body made of pressed soil and melted bone. It breathed, not air, not wind. It breathed remembrance. Leon knelt. He touched its chest, and at that moment, he understood. The bells had not fallen. They had surrendered, because they had held the silence long enough, and now it was time to speak. From the valley that night, a sound rose from the mountain. Not a chime, not a chant, but a heartbeat, slow, heavy, familiar, as if the earth had remembered how to listen to itself.
Worship was never meant to be this quiet. Once the temple had echoed with mantras, with drums, with bells calling down the heavens as if thunder were obedient. Now, when hands joined in prayer, the air held nothing, no resonance, no reply. And those who still dared to pray did not pray for blessings. They prayed to be remembered by their own voices. The curse had grown subtle. It did not strike with violence. It took gently, like a hand over a mouth, like fog over fire. One morning, an elder began chanting aloud in an empty field of dry stalks. He bowed 3 times, breathed in, and spoke. O ancestors who... But no sound came. His lips moved, his breath rose, but the chant was gone before it formed. He tried again, and again, until blood ran from his nose and pooled at his feet like spilt ink from a broken sutra. In the temple, Brother Leon watched, not from distance, from within. The silence had not claimed him yet, but it had begun to press against the cage of his mind. He felt it in the marrow of his fingers, in the space behind his eyes, in the twitch beneath his tongue when he tried to shape words that once came easily. Now, everything he spoke sounded like it came from someone else's throat. He no longer knew if the voice was his or borrowed. The monks no longer gathered, not out of rebellion, but because they no longer knew how. A meeting without sound is not communion. It is observation. It is performance. They bowed in different directions now, faced altars that were no longer there, offered prayers to gods whose names they had forgotten because no one could say them aloud. And the effigy, once kept wrapped in red silk,
now sat at the center of the main hall, unhidden, untouched, and unmistakably alive. It breathed with them. It mimicked them. And it listened to everything they couldn't say. One monk, desperate, drew words across the wall in chalk. "How do we worship when we cannot speak?" And beside that, another wrote in trembling hand, "Is this what worship was always meant to be?" That night, the chalk vanished. The wall was clean, not scrubbed, swallowed. Leon lit incense at dusk. He still tried, even when he no longer believed in answers. The smoke curled around his shoulders, but instead of rising, it settled along the ground like spilled water trying to return to the well. He began to recite the invocation of the old bell. It was a ritual from the earliest scrolls, a verse sung to awaken the mountain's voice. He mouthed the first line. "Let the breath pass through the bronze, and the bronze return it full." But before he reached the second line, his vision dimmed, the smoke thickened, and he heard them. Not in the air, not in the wind, inside the incense. Whispers, worship spoken in reverse, as if the silence had learned how to pray back. That night, he dreamed of the village. The entire valley gathered in the square, but no one spoke, not a word, not a cry. And above them, hanging in the sky, were the 12 bells, restored, enormous, blackened. They swung slowly, but made no sound. And then they turned, not toward the heavens, but downward, toward the people. Their mouths opened, and what fell from them was not sound, but names. Names the people had forgotten, names they were forbidden to speak. Each name struck the earth like a curse, and the ground split beneath every worshipper's feet. Leon woke gasping. His room was cold. The incense had gone out. And across his chest, in ash, a single name had been written. His own. He went to the sanctum. The effigy sat beneath the broken beam. Its mouth was still closed, but its body leaned forward slightly, closer to where the prayers used to echo. It seemed to listen to the absence like others listened to hymns. Leon whispered, "What do you want?" His voice barely rose above breath, but in the stillness it felt deafening. The effigy tilted its head, and behind it, the shadows on the wall began to shape themselves. They formed a single sentence, as if spoken by the dark. "We want what was promised by your silence." He remembered now. The legend of the first bell. It was never made to call divinity. It was forged from a vow, a deal between those who lived above ground and something buried far beneath it. In exchange for safety, for time, for song, there would be silence, maintained by worship, sealed by bells, bound by forgetting. But someone had remembered too much, and now the silence is no longer content to be worshipped. It wants to be God. In the valley, the temples crumbled, but no stones fell. They simply folded, sank into the earth like breath returning to lungs that never wanted it. The villagers who still tried to worship found their altars bare, their gods erased, their rituals inverted. Even the sacred texts had changed their script. They now read backward, and no one could remember what the words were supposed to say. Lian stood alone beneath the sky. He looked up, but even the stars had grown still, as if light itself feared to shimmer, for fear it might draw the silence closer. He breathed deeply. He folded his hands, and he prayed the only way he still could, by not speaking, by letting the silence enter him fully, not as punishment, but as offering. In that moment he heard it, the echo of every forgotten name rising from the soil like steam from sacred water. And beneath that, the silence, now shaped like God, not carved, not crowned, but obeyed.
They walked without footsteps, 12 of them, draped in robes the color of cooling ash, barefoot, heads bowed, moving like breath exhaled from a god too tired to speak. And behind them, cradled in Brother Lian's arms, was the effigy, no longer still, no longer wax, but warm, breathing, watching with eyes that had never blinked until now. The monks did not speak. They had no mouths to do so. Thread, wax, silence stitched them shut long ago. What remained was motion, a sacred rhythm, a surrender of form. They marched down the mountain under a sky where clouds no longer moved, past trees that leaned away, through soil that pulsed with memory, toward the place where the name had first been given and never meant to return. The valley watched. From cracked windows, behind doors that would not close. They knew not why they feared, only that fear had changed. It no longer came with screams. It arrived like smoke. It crept. And as the monks passed, the villagers fell to their knees, not out of reverence, but because something inside them remembered. Something older than prayer, older than guilt. A silence that once saved them and would now claim its debt. Brother Lian led them. His feet were blistered, his breath shallow, but he walked as if held by invisible hands. The effigy in his arms grew heavier with each step. Its limbs had softened, its skin was no longer wax. It had begun to feel real. And it whispered, not aloud, not in thought, but through presence, a pull beneath the ribs, a voice without voice, a command. Bring me back to where the bells first forgot their names. They reached the field by dusk. It had no name, only stones arranged in circles, half buried, half forgotten. Here, once, a temple stood before the temple, before bronze, before monks, before silence had form. Here, the vow was made, to bind the silence in sound, to hold it with names, to bury the bells in ritual so they could never remember why they rang. But the bells were gone now, and so the vow, like the breath of a dying man, was exhaled for the final time. The monks formed a ring. Lian stepped into the center. He laid the effigy on the altar stone, cracked by centuries, worn smooth by forgetting. She lay there, still, but not asleep. Her eyes open, her lips closed, her hands folded. Not in peace, in patience. He raised his hand, and from behind the monks, from every path and corner of the valley, came the people.
The villagers, the lost, the voiceless. They came with mouths full of silence. They came with hands that once held prayer. They came because something inside them said, "This is how it ends, or how it begins again." One by one, the villagers placed offerings at her feet. Not coins, not flowers, breaths. They exhaled, once, slowly, deliberately, and the effigy drank them all. Not visibly, but the air grew thinner, the sky more pale, as if with each gift the world lost just a little more of its ability to speak. Then the abbot returned, not walking, not whole. He came like smoke rising from a grave, his face covered in red ash, his tongue gone, but in his hand the 13th bell, perfect, polished, warm from the pocket of the earth. He knelt, placed it beside her head, and then he bowed so low that his body dissolved into dust before it touched the ground. The procession was complete, the circle unbroken, the silence full. Brother Ljan looked at the sky. A single star pulsed. Not light, not fire, but memory. He understood it was not the silence that had grown hungry. It was the world that had grown too loud. And now the silence had returned to teach them how to listen again. He knelt beside her, touched her hand, and for the first time in days, he heard a bell, not aloud, not echoing, but deep inside his body, his bones, his blood, a toll that said, "It is done. Let there be peace. Let there be stillness. Let there be no more names." And as the night swallowed the last wind from the valley, the effigy closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to wait, because even gods must rest before they are worshipped again.
Years passed, but no one marked them. The calendar turned without sound. The seasons changed without color. Even time, it seemed, had learned to move without leaving footprints. The mountain still stood, but the temple was no longer a place. It was a memory now, a hushed shape beneath fog, half visible when the wind forgot itself. No birds roosted on its roof, no moss grew on its steps. It neither aged nor healed. It simply waited. In the village below, no one spoke of it. They spoke little at all. Children were taught not to sing. Prayers were traced in salt, not sound. Names were written, but never read aloud. And once every season, a single traveler ascended the old path, wrapped in cloth and silence. No one knew their face. They never returned. But each time they left a flower at the base of the bell tower before vanishing into the quiet. The bells, what remained of them, were no longer heard, not even in memory. Their absence had become holy, a relic, a reverence. For even silence, when witnessed long enough, becomes sacred. Brother Ljan was still there, though no longer seen, no longer needed, no longer named. He sat beneath the arch of the tower, where the 13th bell had once hung. His body had grown still, dust had gathered in his robes, but he breathed, barely, quietly.
He had become the temple's final witness, not a guardian, not a priest, not even a man, just an ear the silence had borrowed to ensure it would never be forgotten. The effigy remained at the altar. Its eyes were closed now, its skin cold, but it dreamed, not of bells, not of names, not of worship. It dreamed of stillness so vast it folded the world into itself. And in that dream the silence rang, not like music, not like metal, but like memory pulling itself into form. One night a storm came, the first in years. Thunder without thunder, rain without sound. Lightning lit the temple roof in silver, but made no noise. And in that light, for one instant, the bells were seen again, whole, hanging, glistening. Then the flash passed, and the air swallowed the illusion. No bells, only dust. In the final days, the mountain began to sink. Not collapse, not erode, just descend. The stones settled lower, the trees grew heavier, and the temple slowly vanished into the roots of the earth like it had never been built, but instead grown. One last traveler came, a girl, alone, her footsteps light, but her shadow long. She did not speak, she did not kneel, she carried no offering, only a single bell, small, carved from wood, cracked at the base. She placed it on the altar. She touched the effigy's closed hand, and then she left, leaving behind the bell and a single breath of warmth in the cold air. When morning came, the bell was gone, the altar empty, and beneath the tower, only dust, only silence. But the kind of silence that held meaning, like a name whispered long ago, now finally at rest. The temple no longer stood, the mountain no longer waited, the silence had finished its song. And somewhere, far beneath the earth, beneath the bells, beneath the blood, beneath the vow, a dream ended. Not with fear, not with glory, but with stillness. And in that stillness, the world turned quietly onward, carrying the memory of bells that once rang and would never ring again, because now the silence was whole, and whole things do not echo.